Thank you for joining the Common Sense call-in. We're going to begin momentarily. Welcome to the first Common Sense call-in of 2019. My name is Kristin Strohm, and I serve as President and CEO of Common Sense Policy Roundtable. At any point during the call, if you have a question, please press *3 and you'll be connected to an operator. I wanted to quickly start today by sharing a brief background on Common Sense Policy Roundtable, or CSPR as we like to call it. CSPR is a nonprofit, free enterprise think tank dedicated to the protection and promotion of Colorado's economy. Our mission is to research and promote common sense solutions for economic issues facing Colorado. This call today is to look at several major policy issues currently in our state. We'll take a look at Initiative 300 that Denver voters will decide in May, and also two pieces of legislation that have been hot topics during this year's legislative session: Senate Bill 181, Oil and Gas Regulations, and Senate Bill 188, Family Paid Leave. Joining me today are Chris Brown, the Director of Policy and Research with CSPR, and Mr. Earl Wright, Board Chairman of CSPR, and also Chairman and Founder of AMG National Trust Bank. Welcome, gentlemen. I'd like to start with you, Earl. Could you tell us a little bit more about CSPR and how it was started?
About 5 years ago, Kristin, several of us were concerned about public policy issues that were being presented down to the legislature, and some of the legislation was being passed. And we said, how could this occur, that the economic consequences of what's being considered would be devastating for the state? And we dug into it more. We found out that the fiscal notes and how they were done, and we realized that there was a fallacy with regards to how the economic analysis is being done, a static versus a dynamic modeling. And we talked to the state about the possibility of how they could revise that to be more encompassing and realistic with regards to the impact of public policy issues. And they didn't seem to be very interested. And we talked to others in the community, and we all realized that public policy issues, particularly the economics, were not being fully understood nor presented at the legislative level so that people could be making good choices, at least well-informed good choices, and avoiding unintended economic consequences of some of the things that were passed. Thus, we decided, let's find out if there's a better way. And we went out and we formed the organization. You were part of that at the beginning, Kristin, and there was probably 7 of us that were the co-founders at that time. We raised enough money to investigate finding what they were called dynamic econometric models that would allow us to uniquely, for the state of Colorado, find out what the public policy impact, or the economic impact would be of various public policy issues. And it began to bear fruit and bear positive results. And we initially, Kristin, actually had the model run by the University of Colorado.
That's right.
And the University of Colorado was hired by us to run the model, and We came up with regards to some studies on energy, which were rather controversial, and resulted in having a significant impact on the state, and it's just been, from then it's grown. And I think we probably have at least 10 studies that I'm aware of that we've done, and possibly all or more are on the website at the present time. And the most recent one that we've done, which I think people would probably be quite interested in knowing about, is Initiative 300, where we tried to, and the right to survive. And the whole idea here was we were actually approached by people in the community and said, somebody has to take a look at this from the perspective of what is the economic impact, and nobody else was lining up to do it. And we said, well, sure, we're equipped to do that. And Chris, can you give us a sense as to how that study has gone, what impact it's had, if any, at this point in time, and also what's being done with the study within the community?
Yeah, thank you, Earl, and thanks for joining the call. Initiative 300 is a citizen-led ballot initiative that is appearing on Denver's May mail-in ballot. It establishes and grants new rights to allow individuals to remain in place and erect shelter on public outdoor space that's wholly or partially owned by the city and county of Denver. And so it's going to be something that's voted on here in the next month by constituents within the city of Denver. It separately repeals all existing laws that may come in conflict. And so, as you pointed out, there were some significant concerns that the language of the initiative wasn't necessarily appropriately reflecting the extent to which there might be additional consequences.
Well, when you talk about it, additional consequences, you've also got to talk about, what's being done right now. Can you give us a sense of what are the economics of the 300 and what you found out?
Yeah, so this is being led by an effort to establish rights primarily by an organization promoting this for to benefit those, or purportedly to benefit those experiencing homelessness. So we took a look at the existing network of services that exist for those that are experiencing homelessness. And when you look at, just from a budgetary standpoint, just from a spending standpoint, when you combine the $50 million that are spent by the city and county of Denver, along with the budgets that we could collect from some of the largest service providers in the state, in the city, we found that there was a little over $26,000 per person experiencing homelessness in the city county of Denver spent annually, and you can compare that to around a little over $17,000 spent per student within the Denver public school system. And so there's a large network of services, shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, and other mental health support systems that currently exist. The city has addressed and has several reports about specific concerns, specific challenges, specific current steps that they are taking to improve upon that situation. But nonetheless, it seems that the network and the expenditure is quite significant.
Just a second. It seems to me everybody compares ourselves to Los Angeles, or they compare us to Portland, or they compare us to Seattle. How do we compare there? If you could give us very briefly, how do we compare our situation compared to those three places?
Yeah, so I think the way in which I would look at the situation as it relates to existing laws and how this particular initiative came about is, if you look at the number of emergency shelter, the amount of services and particularly bedding available to those experiencing homelessness, in Denver, there is in fact a surplus of existing number of beds, a little over 1,000 additional beds per relative to the number of people experiencing homelessness. There's about 3,400 individuals experiencing homelessness roughly within the city county of Denver. That is a very different situation from Seattle, from San Francisco, from Los Angeles, where there was a significant deficit in existing number of beds. And that has led to a number of issues related to public expenditure as they have a larger number of people who remain unsheltered every
So
night.
we have more beds than we have homeless here in Denver?
Currently correct.
Okay.
So Chris, what are some of the risks and unintended consequences of Initiative 300?
Yeah, so I think what we tried to look at was some of the concerns around the abuse of public space and the impacts on the entire community resulting from, again, a potential growing larger unsheltered population. We started by looking at the economic impacts and found that in several cities, particularly in Seattle and San Francisco, there was reported significant impacts on tourism and on the ability to attract, retain conventions, large conventions. In San Francisco, there was a convention that would have brought around $40 million in direct expenditure to the city that stated that they chose not to come because of the environment on the street. There was about an $8.5 million convention in Seattle that pulled out. And I think, going back to your question, Earl, about some of the dynamic that currently exists in the city, the long-term risk of having a policy that allows more people to remain outside of that network of services, outside of that network of shelter, outside of that network that is intended to help people get back into more permanent, more stable housing, the easier that is, the larger that population could grow. And we've seen in some of these other cities that there have been recent measures, particularly large tax increases, that have been passed to try to address these large problems. In the city of San Francisco, they just last year passed a new gross receipts tax on the largest businesses in the city that would amount to an additional $40,000 per person experiencing homelessness. In the city of Los Angeles, in the last 3 years, they've passed 2 tax increases that amount to a little over $600 million per year for the next decade.
That's really interesting, Chris. I think that one item all voters should be aware of is what property owned by the city and county in Denver would this encompass?
Yeah, so, aside from city parks, there's a little over 200 city parks.
Now, wait, I want to make certain I'm clear with this. So you're saying that this proposition that they want to pass makes all public space available to the homeless? They can camp and live and reside there?
It makes it open to anybody, it allows for an individual to, again, remain unimpeded and erect shelter on, again, land that is partially or wholly owned by the city, county of Denver. So that includes city parks, sidewalks, easements, public easements, medians. It also includes the extensive Denver Mountain Park network that the city of Denver owns that runs along the Front Range, including Red Rocks. And so some other locations that are subject to this, or likely subject to this, include parts of Denver National Airport, Denver Botanical Gardens, zoo, parts of the Highline Canal that run through Jefferson County. So the city and county of Denver owns or is part owner in a significant amount of public land that would be subject to this.
Winter Park?
Winter Park, parts of Winter Park as well. That's right.
Okay. So this is a huge issue that not just the voters in Denver should be aware of, but anybody that might, travel up to Winter Park, enjoy Red Rocks. We should all be aware of this issue coming up on the May election. I want to remind all the callers that if you have a question for us, please press *3 and you'll be connected to an operator. We're going to shift our focus now to one of the more controversial bills we've seen this legislative session, Senate Bill 181. Chris, very briefly, can you introduce the stated intentions of Senate Bill 181 and where the bill currently stands?
So Senate Bill 181, as you mentioned, the stated intentions are to change the way oil and gas is regulated by changing the mission of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, the organization that regulates oil and gas, It also grants new land use authority to local governments over siting of new oil and gas, and changes the rules around forced pooling. As you pointed out, where this bill currently stands, it passed both chambers of legislature last week and is awaiting signature by the governor.
But you said change the mission. That seems like an awfully soft, squishy term. I can't quite relate to that. So what is it in this bill about changing the mission that we should be aware of versus what's already in place with the director and the various bureaucrats?
So when taking a look at this and responding to some of the questions that were raised in some of the early committee meetings by various senators, is the stated priorities are now to regulate oil and gas and prioritize health and safety.
Who's to do that?
The COGCC, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, when allowing for permits and authorizing new permits.
So they're supposed to do what again versus what they're doing now? Explain that.
It's a little, as you said, soft and squishy. Their stated intention is now to prioritize health and safety.
So what are the health standards? I mean, is it I get a cough and all of a sudden I can say something, or is it you have to have significant information that suggests there's a health issue? What are we talking about?
I wish I could give you a clear answer. I really do. I think that gets into some of the scenarios that we developed and some of the questions that we formed in order to study the potential economic impacts, both in the near term and long term. I think rather than just the prioritization, I think what concerned us from the standpoint of what does this mean for economic growth as it relates to new oil and gas development is not just the addition of that language, but the removal of language that would require a study of the economic and technical feasibility. So this is standard when evaluating new regulation, to weigh alternatives, to look at multiple criteria, and to allow for the economic feasibility of what you're actually regulating to be considered. And by removing that language, to your point, how far that tips the scale away from those considerations towards health and safety are unknown. And I think that's where this uncertainty and where many of the people talking to the impacts of this, I think, were really most concerned about.
So you're telling us that there's a lot more uncertainty with regard to getting permits now than there have been in the past.
That's right, and then that's
and the director that's there, pretty much how they might feel about one issue or another, or how they might be directed by the governor or other folks, could influence what's going on. Is that what you're suggesting?
It's a broad criteria.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Give us a sense, the best you can anyway, of what the economic impact would be and what scenarios you may have run, which the econometric model we have, that's unique for the state of Colorado, which you're really good at running, allows us to do. So give us a sense of the economic impact under various scenarios.
So we studied, as you know, Proposition 112 last fall, and
which was roundly defeated.
Which was squarely defeated. That's right. And we studied it and understood the dynamic in the industry where most of the economic activity occurs with the new development of oil and gas. As existing wells, their production declines over time. Just to maintain sort of a steady level of output and employment, the industry requires a steady stream of new oil and gas development, new wells, new permits. And so by putting greater uncertainty around the permitting of new wells, both in the short term because of the discretion of the COGC director, and long term because of the rules that may in fact come about from this, both at the state and local level, we again responded to some of the questions that were being raised by senators that were asking, what are the potential ranges, what are the bounds? And so
the legislature, people in the legislature asked you to answer some of these questions.
Well, you know, I think they didn't come to us directly necessarily. They were asking these questions in public committee meetings and recognizing that we had the ability to look at the economic impacts, thought that we could really, as you mentioned in your opening statements, inform the debate. So we put together 7 scenarios, and I won't go through each of those 7, but just a couple of the scenarios that I would like to highlight. If you were to see a third, just 1/3 reduction in new oil and gas development, which one gentleman that was next to me providing testimony suggested that his company would lose up to 50%, roughly over 50% of new CapEx. Over the next 11 years, by 2030, you'd see roughly 61,000 fewer jobs, a cumulative impact on state and local tax revenue of over $4.4 billion, and a cumulative impact on GDP of over $84 billion.
This is a 33% reduction in new production on an annualized basis.
That's exactly right.
Because of the difficulty of permits and maybe the local issues that would be brought up and not allowing people to drill.
That's right. A combination of multiple factors that would delay and stall and see fewer permits issued against the current projections.
That's $4.4 billion in state revenue, income revenue?
State and local tax revenue.
That's a lot of money for the state of Colorado.
That's
over 10 years.
That's over 10 years, and that grows over time, but yes, that's $4.4 billion on a general fund annually of a little over, $13 billion. It's undoubtedly significant. Now that's state and local revenue, but to give you perspective.
You have to wonder, Kristin, how that's going to be replaced if that were to occur.
You are correct. Want to remind callers that if you have a question, please press *3. We already have a few questions lined up that we'll be getting to at the end of our conversation. We want to move now quickly to the next topic, which this week, CSPR, along with the REMI Partnership, released a study on Senate Bill 188, which was family paid leave. The bill's received a lot of media attention in the recent weeks. It's moving its way through the legislature quickly. Chris, can you give the callers an overview of what this bill would do?
Yeah, so real quickly, this sets up a new insurance enterprise paid for by a new premium, categorized as a premium, not a tax, which allows this agency to be established, which would be set up to pay benefit claims to replace wages when qualifying employees took time off of work for a combination of short-term disability, family medical leave, or personal medical reasons.
Could I take time off of work to go see Aunt Tessie and take care of her?
If you are, you have an Aunt Tessie? If you get qualified as a temporary caregiver, you'll be allowed to.
Okay.
So
there's some qualifications.
There's some qualifications. Okay. And some definitions, and they've had those pretty debated quite extensively. But I will say that the definition for what would allow you to qualify for leave around family seems to be one of the broadest definitions we've seen in these programs of any state.
So you've compared this to other states?
We've looked extensively at this program relative to really the 3 states that have had a history of this program.
How big is this program? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so the premium and the current fiscal note, and I think we'll talk a little more about the financials, but in the current fiscal note, it's estimated to, in the first year of implementation, we expect that cost increase would raise a little over $950 million, round up to about $1 billion, funded by a premium that is equal to 0.64% of payroll, and that cost is split equally between, it's been amended, so it's now split 60% by the employee and 40% by the employer. So for a worker making about $60,000 a year, that comes to an annual cost of $384. But for perspective, the current corporate income tax in 2018, levied on all businesses in Colorado, collected around $660 million. So the $475 million cost, or that 40%, well, it was the 50% of that premium would represent an effective 70% increase in cost relative to the corporate income tax.
So you're telling all of us that have a company here in Colorado that if this were to be passed, that on average, we'd have a 70% increase?
So I think to clarify, I say on average, but I think it's important to distinguish that also there might be some further and distortionary and unintended consequence where the corporate income tax is based on income.
Right.
This is based on labor. So if you have low labor cost, high income, you might pay more corporate tax. If you have no income and you still have labor, you're still paying this tax.
But on average?
On average.
Okay, all right, very good. It seems to me, though, that one of the things that I read the study, and something that I was just flabbergasted by were the assumptions in the study that they put forth with regards to utilization. And I have a significant labor force here in Colorado, as many of our board directors do. We all kind of looked at each other and kind of rolled our eyes like we wish only 3.5% of the population would take advantage of it. How realistic is that, and how important is that assumption behind the economics?
So I think what we wanted to point out is how important that assumption is.
Okay.
In underpinning this whole debate. And so recognizing the policy is only as good as the assumptions, I think we wanted to point out that we point to some of these other states that have experience. California has a utilization rate of 4.8%. Rhode Island has a utilization rate of over 13.5%.
And 4 times bigger than ours is supposedly going to be?
Seemingly so, that's
wow.
right.
Okay.
And on top of it, one of the largest determinants for whether people are willing or able or choose to take this is what their wage replacement rate is.
Right.
And it seems that the wage replacement, or it is the case that the wage replacement ratio that's proposed under Senate Bill 181 here in Colorado is more beneficial than those other states when we could compare the utilization rate.
So versus other states, there might be more encouragement because of dollar replacement.
That's right.
To take advantage of this in Colorado.
That's right.
Than other. Okay. Well, what's the cost? What does that mean?
Yeah. So if you saw just a doubling of that utilization to say 7%, those costs would double, and that premium then would have to adjust to make up for that. And I think the challenge is that in the current form of the bill, that premium rate is capped at 0.99%. So it can only move from 0.64 to 0.99.
So about a 50% increase.
About 50% increase. So if you saw a utilization rate climb at a certain point below 7%, that premium would not be sufficient to fund the program, and you'd face cash flow problems and solvency problems. And so we wanted to raise that concern because of our experience in studying some of these other programs, particularly PARA, and we've had lengthy discussions and research around PARA, where those assumptions where the experience has not lived up to the assumptions, and multiple times over the last decade or so, the state has had to go back and try to reform, which has amounted to further and further cost increases. And so we wanted to point out these potential pitfalls really as a matter of good government.
Well, I guess I want to make sure it's clear to all of us. So if we have a cap of 9% that would be paid and split between the employer and the employee, and you're telling us that if the utilization rate is above 7%?
Somewhere between 5 and 7%.
Between 5 and 7%, and Rhode Island is over 10.
13, yep.
13. So how does that extra funding, if everybody up to 10 or 12 or 13 takes advantage of it? We haven't raised enough money, and we've got a cap on it. The state legislature in its wisdom put a cap on it, not to argue about it. Where does that other money come from?
Well, again, Earl, you asked some great questions. I don't have all the answers for you because, unfortunately, in statute, you couldn't raise the premium. Because it's an enterprise, it can only receive up to 10% of its funding from the general fund, so the general fund couldn't bail it out. It can issue revenue bonds, but you would understand that if that utilization rate is sustained higher than what that premium would allow, there is no possible way you would ever pay off those bonds. So if you take on more debt, you'd just be drowning in debt. So they would have to go back to the drawing board and have a legislative change.
Sounds to me like we got another pair on our hands where we've overpromised and underfunded, and we could possibly have a pair on our hands where we're underfunded and overcommitted, and that could be a real issue. Chris, thanks. I don't know if you made me feel any better, but thank you.
Not calling you do, huh?
Oh,
no, thank you.
At this time, we'd like to open the call for 10 minutes of questions. And for any of you joining us, please do as Kristin has said, put your question in, and as she suggested, we'll start taking questions now.
Yep, so as a reminder, you just need to press *3 if you have a question, and you'll be placed into queue. We do have one caller with a question on Initiative 300, Harold Smethels. The phone is now live for you if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Forgive me,
Harold,
I had to take it off mute. I'm sorry. Yes.
No worries.
It has to do with a major cost that is not included in the analysis, and that has to do with raw sewage that will wind up in Cherry Creek or the Platte, as all of Denver's storm sewers run to those rivers. In California, Seattle, or Washington, it runs in the storm sewer and winds up out in the Pacific Ocean, and no one's challenged that. But here, that sewage winds up in the rivers. I vision Confluence Park where the children are swimming. But there's going to be a requirement to clean that up and provide sanitary facilities for these encampments. The cost of that would be quite substantial. Has anybody looked into that and the impact of this on our rivers and drinking water supply?
Well, you're not painting a very pretty picture, Harold. But Chris, do you know, has there been any research by Denver Water or others on what kind of that cost might look like? I know that we didn't look at that specifically in our analysis, but it's a really great point that there will be a lot of potential costs associated with this.
Yeah, so at some of the different events that I've shared these results at, there have been different individuals from Denver Board of Water Commissioners, and I should just note that just as of a couple of days ago, that Denver Board of Water Commissioners did take a position to oppose 300 on, I think, the very basis that the very premise that you've put out there.
Harold, have you come across any numbers?
I have not. I guess you could take the number of anticipated homeless people and provide some ratio of, first off, you would have to either gather them or to have individual porta potties throughout the city. But
yeah.
I've spent my whole adult life watching us clean the Platte from an open sewer to a fishable, wadable stream, and we're going backwards to it. So I would imagine there will be substantial litigation against the city to stop that if this passes. And that someone needs to, I guess you could make some assumptions. The ridiculous one would be that each homeless person gets or each street camper, homeless or not, gets a porta potty. Or we have to adopt rules, in the mountains, you can't do your business within 300 feet of open water in the streams. So there's got to be something that we've got to somehow quantify that, because I guarantee you it will happen. The lawsuits and the Clean Water Act violations.
We have an email question that came in, is for you, Chris, with regards to the question of debrucing that's being considered, and the question of debrucing and the possibility of loss of energy revenues. Have you had a chance to look at that or think about that? I don't know what the individual might be referring to, but can you give us a little sense of that?
Yeah, so thanks, Rob. I think, so you're referring to a measure which now is being discussed in the legislature that is an attempt to put as a ballot question this coming fall, I think is what being referred to. it would change the restriction under Tabor, which would allow for the state to keep revenue in excess of the Tabor cap, which is set at population growth plus 1%, population plus inflation. And
So that's the excess revenue the state has that they would normally return back under Tabor. And so the debrucing is not doing that. Well, what I guess the question they're trying to get at is if the legislation with regards to energy comes to play, how does that impact that excess revenue that people are talking about that they want to use in the government or maybe return to the public?
Well, if some of these scenarios that we've modeled as it relates to Senate Bill 181 were to come out, you would see a situation where you'd have less state revenue and you probably wouldn't hit that cap. But right now, the projections actually in the last March forecast were even revised downward from where they were currently projecting in terms of what that surplus would be. But undoubtedly, you would likely not even see that cap hit if you were to have some of these situations play out as we've had.
So the whole issue of debrucing, depending on what happens with energy here, could disappear.
Unless you lost more population, and somehow that ratio would get a little tricky. But undoubtedly, it seems to be the case that it could. Yeah, and just in general, that revenue has been revised downward to the point where, we talk about a loss of $4.4 billion. Just a couple months ago, they were suggesting that surplus would have been a little under $1 billion over the next 3-4 years, and that's been revised downward. So you're not really close to where those revenue projections are for the impacts of 181.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for your questions that come in. We thank you for the email question, and we hope to see you on our next conference call.
Thank you.
Thank you.